After Battle of Issus, Alexander conquered Asia Minor and Anatolia. Then he moved into Gaza, Philistine. Their Persian base is not so strong, so he easily invaded Gaza and moved to Egypt. Even there is so weak Persian military base after the War of Issus, so that the Egyptian governor of Persia surrendered to Alexander without battle. The Alexander conquered prosperous Egypt, then moved into around Babylonia to invade it. Darius' most obvious advantage was numerical, and he used the inverter to gather a vast army from every corner of his empire. Darius then chose his battlefield carefully. A large plot featureless expanse along the Tigris River near Gaugamela, where the Persian numerical superiority could be used to full effect. Finally, Darius created a special weapon of 200 chariots with blades attached to their wheels. This would be launched against the Macedonian flank. The blades would carve opening in the formation into which the cavalry could pour. Alexander's advisors, threatened by the size of the Persian army, urged him to attack at night to mask their inferior numbers. Refusing this advice, Alexander went to bed. Darius, fearing just such an assault, kept his army standing ready for battle all night. By morning, Alexander had already scored an advantage. His troops were well rested. In contrast to the sleepless Persian, Alexander's most pressing problem was the lack of a geographic anchor to prevent encirclement. His solution was to stagger his force at an angle on the left and right side of the flank so that they could face an enemy encircling movement head-on. At a distance behind the main flank, he positioned a second line made up of allies and mercenaries. His forces were arranged so that if Persians did outflank them and surrounded his army, it could form a hollow rectangle with men facing outward in all directions. As the battle began, Alexander led his cavalry to the right. Darius ordered his cavalry to mirror Alexander's movement, with the result that the lines were stretched out and the center of gravity began to shift away from the ground that Darius had so carefully prepared. Darius therefore ordered his scouted chariots to charge, but the Macedonian skimmers and javeliners picked up the charioteers. When the remainder reached the flank, the Macedonian opened lanes for the chariot to pass armed as they slowed to turn lightly. Armed troops killed the rest of the charioteers. Determined to contain Alexander's swift, Darius dispatched more Persian cavalry to block him, and an intense cavalry battle ensued. Meanwhile, on the left, the Macedonian flank was hard-pressed and in danger of losing contact with Alexander and the Macedonian right. A gap developed in the Macedonian line, into which a group of Persian cavalry poured. Had they wheeled to the right and struck the main flank from behind, they might well have broken the flank and won the battle, but the Persian cavalry began looting the Macedonian baggage train. Those elements of the second line of the Macedonian flank had time to confront and contain. Meanwhile, Alexander had decided to take advantage of the parallel stretching of the Persian lines, and he now led a bold charge, cutting from the right flank where Darius stood in his chariot. The companion cavalry formed into a wedge with Alexander himself as at its head. Crushed into the Persian rank, Darius took fight, and just as he had at the earlier battle of Issus, turned his chariot and fled from the battlefield, abandoning his army. Upon his desertion, Persians in the section lost heart, and after some tough fighting, Alexander's army routed them. Alexander had won the battle, and with it the Persian Empire. Although Darius escaped and would manage to evade captured for another year or so until mortally wounded by his men. From the moment he fled from Gaugamela, he had effectively forfeited his throne. Alexander became the king of the king and effectively